If you were to glance at the manga I've read, what you'll see is predominantly battle shonen, ultraviolent seinen, and plenty of regrets. But if you were to look for what is missing, it would be apparent that I have not read much in the way of shoujo. I've only completed one relatively unknown and equally unlikable shoujo manga, and it was only a single volume. In the world of anime, I'm a little better off, having watched Banana Fish, Kimi ni Todoke, Aruharu Ride, and one of my favorite anime, Kare Kano. Still, I can't help but feel my lack of experience with shoujo has been a huge oversight in my understanding of manga as a collective medium. That's why I picked 5 different shoujo manga to read, spanning multiple eras from the 90s to present day, and all being highly respected. This is meant to be an experiment where I can find what I like in shoujo manga and what kinds of accompanying genres I'm more interested in. I'm aiming to read 3 volumes of each series, with one exception we'll get to, and hopefully that will be enough to leave an impression on me before deciding if I want to continue them in my exploration of shoujo manga. The first manga I picked to read was Kimi ni Todoke. Maybe this wasn't the most efficient way to learn about shoujo manga because, as mentioned before, I have watched the anime, but I wanted to use it as a control going into this experiment for a couple different reasons. For one, I haven't seen the anime in nearly 10 years, and my opinions of it were shaped when I was a different person. I wanted to see it again and reevaluate my thoughts. If my opinions of it were to improve, that drastically raises the floor for my expectations of shoujo manga going forward. For 2, Kimi ni Todoke is perhaps one of the most basic, vanilla shoujo, not to say that's a bad thing. After reading its first 3 volumes, I would frame it as a benchmark for a good standard shoujo romance. There aren't particularly unordinary genres attached or surprising twists that reinvent the shoujo will, but it doesn't need that to be true for it to stand tall amongst the best of its kind. What brought me into Kimi ni Todoke was the cute relationship between Sawako and Kazehaya, but what ultimately kept me engaged was Sawako's journey of finding meaningful friendships. She is kind at heart, but comes across as scary to others due to a misunderstanding of her name's pronunciation and her general gloominess. Kazehaya doesn't seem to mind, however, and through his encouragement, Sawako seems to find herself surrounded by people who take an interest in her, some of them even becoming her friends. Genuine flaws in her personality are far and few between. As a character, she is relatively simple and overtly pure. That isn't a bad thing per se, as the story is about Sawako's peers realizing her true nature is nothing like they could have imagined, although I am sometimes left wondering where her character is supposed to go after her public image is changed and she makes friends. How her character is supposed to be kept interesting for 30 entire volumes, I don't know yet, but I'm willing to stick around to see it. No matter how simple Kimi ni Todoke is, I find it consistently endearing and uplifting, which is enough to convince me that it's worth reading. However, I must mention that the 3rd volume introduced Kurumi as Sawako's love rival. I don't new addition to the cast when I first watched it all those years ago. I understand her role is designed to create a rival. It's how she pretends to be a friend to Sawako before slapping her in the face that upsets me. Turned off by the story. It doesn't inspire me to read volume 4. Obviously, love rivals are nothing new in romance manga, but I do wonder how my feelings here could translate to other shoujo manga I read in the future. Hopefully, for the sake of both Kimi ni Todoke and shoujo manga on the whole, I find myself becoming more forgiving of this character conflict. Overall though, I can't complain too much. I like Sawako's journey a lot, and I enjoy the supporting characters a ton. Their group chemistry is great, and they feel like genuine friends. Also, the art is super pretty and equally cute. I almost expected it to feel super outdated because I kind of know what older shoujo art can look like, but this art is holding up extraordinarily well. All the characters look extremely cute and they're drawn with just the right amount of detail. I can't say I'm coming away from these 3 volumes with anything or giving it a read. I found it on AniList when looking at the highest rated shoujo manga, thought the art looked great, and most importantly, I saw the girl had a hearing aid. The name of the manga suddenly made was meant to be a control. I wanted the second series to have a unique quirk that set it aside from shoujo manga that offered more than a simple romance, and A Sign of Affection fit the bill perfectly. The first thing I noticed during my reading was just how beautiful the art is. Of the 5 manga I chose to read, this one is the newest and it shows. The art style is modern and I can't overstate it, very, very pretty. I can appreciate just how pretty the boys are, and I'm sure plenty of girls would find themselves greatly enjoying them, and likewise, the protagonist Yuki is so cute, I absolutely adore her. As a person who is obviously not deaf, I can't speak for those that are, but to an outside perspective, Yuki's character feels exceedingly authentic to the experience of being deaf. Whether it's her misunderstanding lip reading or being shocked by someone approaching her from behind, the manga constantly considers what it would be like to live as a deaf person. In that way, I can understand the curiosity that the main love interest, Itsuomi, expresses for her. Her life is so unlike everyone else's, or maybe it'd be more accurate to say that the world she lives in is different. And that's really at the heart of what makes this manga special. The experiences that we live are shaped by the world we exist in. The divide between Yuki and Itsuomi is their worlds, one who travels the world and the other who has been limited to Japan, mostly due to their disability. Yet he still notices her because no matter how small her world may be, there is only one of her in the world. Her experience in life is still valuable, no matter how many countries he's seen or cultures he's been a part of. And there's something really beautiful in that message that I can't help but kind of relate to. My girlfriend has lived all over the world and seen more countries than I can count. Yet my travel has been limited to only 3 states due to my parents' line of work throughout my childhood. I used to have a lot of travel envy, and maybe I still do sometimes, but I appreciate how Yuki sees things. Rather than envying Itsuomi for being able to see the world, she desires to see it with him, while he desires to become a part of her world, no matter how big his world is. Maybe there's something there for me to learn. As someone now in his mid-20s and preparing to enter the next stage of life, I want to see more of the world, and I want to do that with the person I love, regardless of how much she has already seen. Even this October, we have plans to visit the ocean for the first time in my life, and that's special even if it may seem dumb for someone else, or the ocean has been a constant in her life. Her ordinary has become my extraordinary, but she still wants to be a part of my small little world. In that way, this manga unexpectedly contextualized some of my own feelings and made me feel a little less insecure. I really love A Sign of Affection. If me opening up about my life experiences didn't make that apparent enough. The art is beautiful, the characters are charming, its handling of deafness is excellent, and what it has to say about the experiences and worlds we live in is nothing short of personally relevant to me. I went into A Sign of Affection hoping it would give me a unique experience in shoujo manga, and it did just that. Not only was it unique for a shoujo, I think what it does is unique to shoujo. I can't imagine this story being told in any other kind of magazine. It's so tender, soft-spoken, and beautiful. After reading 3 volumes, I realized that this is the kind of manga I have been missing out on. This is the kind of manga that makes me excited to read more shoujo. After finding a shoujo manga that particularly resonated with me, I decided to take things in a different direction with the 3rd manga I read, Yona of the Dawn. As much as I implied that I read A Sign of Affection for its unique qualities as a shoujo romance, I read Yona with the full intention of experiencing a manga in wholly different genres: action, fantasy, and historical. Still a shoujo manga, of course, but a different breed of manga than the previous 2. My immediate thought was, what can a shoujo of these genres bring to the table that a shonen cannot? My answer would arrive by the end of the first chapter, the female experience, one that is staunchly feminine and ripe with emotions born of a young girl. If that sounds like a majority of shoujo, you would be correct, but it's how Yona the Dawn can combine those elements of shoujo storytelling with its complementary genres that makes it the unique experience I was looking for. Even in comparison to shonen with a female protagonist, such as Stone Ocean or Soul Eater, Yona is far more in touch with traditionally feminine emotion. Those previous examples empower their female protagonists to be on the same footing as men, or at the very least, they are never treated as weaker because they are girls. In other words, these series frame women as not being all that different from men. Even Hirohiko Araki has said as much about his own writing. They are equally capable in battle and not limited by their gender in any notable way. And I think that sort of portrayal of women is, generally speaking, pretty great. It empowers women as being strong, both physically and emotionally. It's awesome to see a girl kicking as much butt as any guy can. However, it's also nice to see stories that can explore the struggles of being a woman. Especially for a man like myself, that kind of writing can give me a new perspective that I might not have considered otherwise. This leads me to say, what excites me about Yona the Dawn is Yona herself. She embodies the fragility of being a young girl, especially when considering her romantic idealism and rose-tinted view of the world. Yet the first chapter so spitefully smashes that fragility down onto the ground, shattering it into a million pieces, turning that rose tint into a far darker shade of blood red. While Kimi ni Todoke explored some heartfelt messages about finding a place to belong, and A Sign of Affection talked about how we interact with the world around us, Yona's problems are a little more than teenage drama or relatable struggles. The romantic feelings she experiences are much akin to what can be seen in those shoujo, but it ends in horrific tragedy at the hands of her own love interest, subverting what I've come to expect from shoujo protagonists, with their wide eyes and innocent love. Yona, who is a spoiled princess ignorant of her own country's struggles, is forced to confront her own limitations after her father is killed by the man she always loved. It's bleak, it's cruel, and it shocked my sensibilities. She is made to feel weak, helpless, and vulnerable, all the worst shortcomings of being a fragile girl in a relentless world. Without her status as a princess, she has nothing to prop her up, and she has to learn how to walk on her own two legs. The story abuses the fact that she is a girl without much power, but that makes her character arc all the more engaging, with the following 3 volumes worth of story exploring her coming of age, assuming personal responsibility, and learning to stand on her own 2 feet. I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of both Yona the Dawn and its protagonist, not to mention all the other characters. 3 volumes felt like enough to get an idea for the previous shoujo I read, but in a story as grand as this one, it's hard to feel satisfied with such a small portion of it, but it does excite me in a way. I will most certainly be reading more of Yona the Dawn because I want to see where it goes. In what way will Yona grow? How will the story evolve as she builds up her army? What will the battles look like? I want to know the answers to those questions, and so I would say Yona the Dawn was an absolute success in getting me interested to read more. I want to be upfront. Going into the 4th shoujo I chose to read, I knew that Sailor Moon was probably not meant for me. Maybe you could say that about all of shoujo manga. I am an adult man after all. But Mahou Shoujo has never been a genre on my radar. Nothing about its common character designs, themes, or aesthetics draw me in. If anything, I feel a bit adverse to those qualities. Of the few Mahou Shoujo I've seen, none particularly click with me, and I get the sense that I just don't have a meaningful connection with the genre. If there was ever a time to use the phrase, "it isn't my cup of tea," or "it isn't for me," now is certainly that time. Still, I thought it was important to force myself to at least try Sailor Moon. If nothing else, I wanted to have an understanding of one of the most successful shoujo manga ever made and why it meant so much to its fanbase. It isn't as if Sailor Moon is put on a podium of the most critically acclaimed manga of all time, but it clearly resonated with millions of people. After reading it, I kind of get the idea that Sailor Moon was the shoujo equivalent of something like Pokemon, a show that isn't a critical darling, but a cartoon that meant the world to countless children. And hell, I'm not gonna pretend I don't love Pokemon. It's a show I have a ton of fondness for, regardless of its critical merit. None of this is to say Pokemon or Sailor Moon are bad shows. The fact they resonated with so many people, many of which were children, would suggest otherwise, and that shouldn't be talked down on. That said, yeah, Sailor Moon just is not for me. I started this project by blazing through the first 3 manga in a few days, and then I hit Sailor Moon, and out of sheer disinterest, I could not bring myself to continue reading it after the first 3 chapters. Nothing about its characters, world, comedy, or story gripped me enough to push me past my general dislike of the genre, and nothing was entertaining enough to put me in the shoes of a younger girl experiencing it for the first time. I didn't hate anything about it, but I didn't like much either. In fact, most of it just didn't leave an impression on me. Perhaps I should force myself to read more, to stick with the original premise of this experiment, but I don't want to hate read Sailor Moon. It certainly doesn't deserve that, and I don't want to hate it. I would rather remain uninterested and still appreciative of it than to turn my experience into a dragged out, negative time. Not to mention, I am primarily doing this reading experiment to find shoujo manga that I can enjoy, and I would rather get back to reading more shoujo than procrastinating for another month because I didn't want to read Sailor Moon. Oh whoops, look at the time. Another month went by and I still haven't read anything else. Of course, if you're a fan of Sailor Moon or grew up with it, please understand that the reason I am doing this is to broaden my taste, and I do think Sailor Moon was deserving of a chance because it is so important. I gave it a chance, and it just isn't for me. With that admittedly sad disappointment now on my shoujo record, I did start to worry about the 5th manga I read, Fruits Basket. I had personal reasons for picking Kimi ni Todoke, A Sign of Affection, and Yona the Dawn. They were series I had specifically picked out because they caught my attention, but Sailor Moon was mostly chosen out of an obligation to try a classic series, and the same could be said of my reasoning for picking up Fruits Basket. I've been watching anime for well over a decade now, and came across it many times, and at no point did I personally gravitate towards it. However, the entire purpose of this video and reading experiment was to force myself to read shoujo manga, which I would otherwise not prioritize over the next type battle shonen or ultra-violent seinen. Luckily, Fruits Basket panned out with moderate success. Not everything about it has totally won me over, including the protagonist, who is a bit too squeaky clean for my liking. I do enjoy her moments of personal healing from her mother's passing that we occasionally can see, but her personality is otherwise about as simple and bright as can be. Although it's a bit underhanded to seriously critique her on that premise because her overtly cheery personality is a fundamental part of developing the cast around her. Also, I do have to remind myself that 3 volumes doesn't tell the full story, and her character could go in some interesting directions once the drama gets a little more spicy. That's something I have to reserve my judgment for. Additionally, the artwork is notably dated, even compared to the nearly 2 decades old Kimi ni Todoke, which is held up a bit better in my eyes. I understand that Natsuki Tayaka had some health complications that eventually impacted her art quality, although I'm not going to pretend to be well informed on that, but regardless of context, the art of Fruits Basket is not its greatest strength even before her health issues. Not to say the art is actually bad or anything, just a little dated. That said, in my limited experience, the positives definitely outweigh the negatives. I found myself actually enjoying it more as the chapters continued, with new characters often piquing my interest and the overarching narrative keeping me engaged with the conflict of its characters. Of all the manga I read, Fruits Basket probably leans the most into slice of life, but its premise of using the zodiac calendar as a basis for most of its main characters puts a really cool spin on their dynamics and relationships. Kyo and Yuki particularly have a great duality, mirroring the story of the rat and cat told in the first chapter. Despite the initial story seemingly demonizing the rat and victimizing the cat, both characters are humanized by their circumstances. Kyo initially seems to be a raging problem child because of his role as the unwanted cat, but there are glimmers of kindness that suggest there's more to him than anger. Yuki is a sympathetic character as well, with an underlying message that being the rat isn't all that Kyo thinks it's cracked up to be. It's this back and forth between understanding one character and then the other that makes them a great pair of love interest. Although, I'm a little surprised that next to no romance happens in the first 3 volumes, less than what was in Kimi ni Todoke, which was already very slow paced. In fact, there's barely enough to hint at any one character having a crush on another. There's cute moments, sure, but its priorities are in building up the stories of each character, and I actually appreciate that despite my own preferences of faster paced romance. Maybe I feel that way because romance just hasn't been the focus in any regard, but whatever the reason may be, I didn't have any problem with the lack of romantic progression. I am curious to see the long term of how I feel once the romance plays out, but for now, I have no qualms with the story's pacing. Chapters feel somewhat episodic despite the linear narrative, and that never seemed to slow down the story to an unreasonable pace. Overall, I liked what I read of Fruits Basket and would be happy to continue it. I wouldn't say I'm blown away or it gripped me as much as A Sign of Affection or Yona the Dawn did, but it was possibly among the most pleasant reads, along with Kimi ni Todoke. Part of me wonders if the newer anime would be the better way to experience it, especially considering how pretty the new character art is, but I wouldn't be opposed to reading and watching it. Heck, I might even be a little curious to compare it to the older adaptation, since that's a classic in its own right and shouldn't be entirely replaced by the newer version. Either way, I'm glad I finished this experiment with yet another success. So, for now, that's been my shoujo journey. I restrained myself from reading any of these series past volume 3 until I finished writing about all of them, and now that I finished this script, I am ready to read some more. I especially found myself liking A Sign of Affection and Yona the Dawn if that wasn't obvious enough, but nothing here was a bad experience, and I would say each series gave me something valuable. Even my reading of Sailor Moon is a positive experience to me because I can now say I tried one of the most important shoujo manga ever made. My understanding of the demographic is only just starting to grow, but my affinity has grown tremendously, and I think that's a pretty cool outcome from an experiment I was a little nervous to start. I can't say I'm ready to start making detailed analysis on shoujo manga, my knowledge on the demographic is far too limited for that, but I am ready to read more. Also, hey, I did a poll before uploading this video about if you guys read shoujo manga, and a lot of you said that you don't. Not many actually said that they dislike it either, so I'm gonna suggest a lot of you need to go check out some shoujo manga, you know? You never know what you're limiting yourself from if you only ever stick to just shonen and seinen. So maybe give shoujo a try. That's just a thought.